And he said, "Hey, Mom, I just want you to know you were right." And I said, "About what?" I didn't know what we were talking about. He said, "About the marijuana. You told me years ago that it would hurt my brain, and it has ruined my mind and my life. And I'm sorry, and I love you." And 3 days later, he was dead.
Welcome to the Sandstone Care Podcast, where we help teens, young adults, and their families overcome the challenges that come with substance use, addiction, and mental health conditions. Welcome to the Sandstone Care Podcast with me, Clint Malley. Today we are talking about teen and young adult marijuana use. Today we are joined by Laura Stack, and she's the author of The Dangerous Truth About Today's Marijuana. Laura Stack was best known in the business world for her professional moniker, the Productivity Pro. Her 30-year career as a keynote speaker, best-selling author of 8 productivity books, and corporate spokesperson came to a screeching halt on November 20th, 2019, when her 19-year-old son, Johnny, died by suicide after becoming psychotic from dabbing high THC marijuana concentrates. Laura responded by forming the nonprofit Johnny's Ambassadors to educate parents and teens about the dangers of today's high THC marijuana on adolescent brain development, mental illness, and suicide. Her platform now brings education, awareness, and prevention curriculum to parents, drug prevention conferences, community groups, and schools to stop youth marijuana use. She is a powerful speaker who brings Johnny's personal warning and solid research together in her new book, The Dangerous Truth About Today's Marijuana, Johnny Stack's life and death story, described as a force of nature with unstoppable drive and unwavering purpose. Laura is determined to get teens to #stop dabbing. Laura Stacks, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Clint. I'm happy to be here. Appreciate that introduction.
So I read the book from cover to cover and was really impressed by, first of all, hearing a detailed account of Johnny's story, but also throughout that, your own experiences throughout this, this ordeal, this really difficult time in your life, and also the research that was kind of weaved in and out of the book, especially at the end, which we'll get to a little bit later. So why don't you kind of set the story for us? Obviously the premise for Johnny's Ambassadors was something that was a passion for you, and it was something that was near and dear to your heart because of tragedy. But I want you to be able to kind of tell your story in your own words. So, tell us about your drive for writing this book.
Sure. Well, to understand the book, you would have to first understand Johnny. We live in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, where he was born and lived in the same house his entire life. Of course, Colorado was the first state to legalize recreational marijuana in 2012, and it was commercialized in 2014. And at that time, he was 14 years old because he was born in 2000. So the math is pretty easy. So that means he was a freshman in high school. Johnny, if you go on the website, johnnysambassadors.org, you will see him. He was handsome, charming. His smile just lit up a room. He was funny, very intelligent. He had a 4.0 GPA up until the very end of high school. Got an 800 out of 800 on the math portion of the SAT, just a genius in math. A scholarship to Colorado State University, and he was so involved in life. He had great friends. He ran cross country. He played soccer, piano, guitar. He loved Jesus. We're a strong Christian family. We taught Sunday school for many, many years, taught 4-year-olds. He had a heart for the homeless, did a lot of volunteering, and really was a servant in that way. Just a great kid. I wish you could have known him. Just his whole life ahead of him, a lot of excitement, wanted to be a computer engineer or something in game design, and had his whole life ahead of him.
And so his story, or at least the start for this book, kind of centers around his suicide, right? And when he committed suicide, it was not a all of a sudden out of nowhere kind of thing. There was like a long build up to this. And so I think one of the things that we think about is we think about these things with suicide as being out of nowhere, right? It seemed like, and it is when it happens, right? I know personally from friends of mine who have overdosed, but at the same time, it's like it's a buildup, right? So let's kind of like take a step back and let's talk about the buildup, right? Like the challenging ordeals that kind of led to that, and then let's talk about how we can help prevent this kind of thing from happening to other families, right?
Yes. Well, and that's exactly what we're doing with Johnny's Ambassadors. We have 3,300 ambassadors now all over the US. I'm just one person, so we need a lot of people out there helping and communicating and trying to get the word out about marijuana and how strong it is. And we can talk about that. But Johnny, as I said, was he was perfectly normal. I'm always very clear with people. He did not have mental illness. He was not self-medicating. He was not depressed. He did not have anxiety. We don't have any kind of psychosis in our family, anything like that, because a lot of people believe that marijuana use seems to follow all those things. Where we live in Colorado and in many states where marijuana is legal, marijuana is a recreational tool for teens. They can't get alcohol till they're 21. It's very hard to get alcohol. It's even hard to get cigarettes now at 21. But in Colorado, you can get your medical marijuana card at the age of 18. And so it's kind of a rite of passage in many of our high schools here. That when you're 18, you go to what they call the pot shop docs, and they are very well known. You pay your few $100s. You say you have some kind of malady, a migraine, a backache, something that's hard to prove, and you are given your red card so that you can legally go to a dispensary down the road and buy marijuana products, wax, shatters, dabs legally. I buy a lot of them, take them back to the high school and sadly the middle school and sell them to the other kids. So this is not the black market. It's illegal to do, of course, but it's not like they're buying it from dealers off the streets or that dispensary owners are, giving them products that they shouldn't be. They have a card that illegally allows them to buy these products. And so Johnny has a friend who will be nameless on our street who had a big brother. When he was 14 years old, he went to a party at his house and his brother had a medical marijuana card and there was marijuana at the party and Johnny used it. I know this because he came home and told me. I mean, you have to remember we were a very close family. I was his person, and to be clear, drugs are not allowed in the Stack household. We did not allow drug use. I did not use. We didn't make it available. It was not allowed, as was any substance in our home. But we, always told the kids, don't use drugs, don't use marijuana, it'll hurt your brain cells, all the things, I don't know, that you thought you were supposed to say as a parent. When I was growing up, my father was a colonel in the military. We were more afraid of our parents than we were of the police back then. But Johnny just came home and said, hey, there was a party. So-and-so's, brother was there and it was there. And we all wanted to try to get high. And I used it. And I liked it, he told me. And I said, well, it will kill your brain cells, I think was the brilliance that I came up with at the time. And I said, I don't ever want you to use it again. It's bad for you and it will ruin that beautiful mind of yours. And that's the end of it. So that's, I thought, would be the end of it. Of course, that was not the end of it. He hid it for many years. The marijuana today, the vapes, the dabs, there's no odor in them. They're very easy to hide. They're very small devices. It's not like the skunky flower marijuana that we used to roll in papers, and smoke like joints. That the marijuana is not that. And that's part of our mission when we're educating, so that parents understand it's not what you used, when you were a kid. So he was fine for many years. He hid his marijuana use. He started to become a couple years into it. We saw some anxiety, little isolating, and we just thought he was a teen, typical teen. It was really kind of hard for us because I'm completely ignorant about today's marijuana and the potency and the effects. So I just thought he was being irritable, and a typical teen. When he hit his senior year, however, things really started to unravel. His personality changed. He became very defiant, stopped following rules. He just lost interest in school. It was a struggle just to get him to go to class. He became verbally abusive, which he was never like that at all to me. He was always sweet. And he would, say, F you, you see, just horrible, horrible language. He would leave for weeks at a time, and we wouldn't know where he was. We had a tracker on his phone, so we could vaguely know he's up north somewhere. But, this was when we started realizing how much he was actually addicted to marijuana. He was using in the house in front of us. And anyway, it was bad. His grades started to go down, and he turned 18 his senior year in February of 2018, and he moved out. And he said, I'm taking all my savings and I'm getting a place down the road, and I don't have to go to school, and I don't have to do what you say, and I'm going to do what I want. And so he moved out and started to get into a lot of trouble dealing, buying products. We saw on his Snapchat after he died that he was doing what the brother was doing earlier. We saw photos of all the marijuana products from the dispensaries, and he was selling them in the high school and the middle school, and he had become that kid. Now Johnny was the drug dealer, and there's in here you can get marijuana in 5 minutes in any of these schools up here. So he continued to use. He went to his school on his scholarship. He went to Colorado State University, and he texted me a couple weeks into it. I've been using marijuana dabs nonstop for 2 weeks, and I feel like killing myself. I had no idea still what dabbing was. I had still not heard of it. I still didn't understand any of it. But I did understand I feel like killing myself. So we went and got him and had to unenroll him. He lost his scholarship, mental hospital. They let him out after 3 days. I begged them not to because he told me when they let him out, he was going to kill himself. And he tried, and we were able to stop him. And they put him back in the mental hospital. And he was there for several weeks where the THC, for the very first time, finally left his body. And he recovered. And he just became my sweet, normal Johnny again once he was sober. And so we allowed him to move back home. And so he recovered at home for several months, and he could have been just fine. He was normal. But he said, you know what? I'm ready to go back to school. I'd like to try again. I'm sober. I'm not going to do that again. And I want to try to go to University of Northern Colorado. And so he went up there and did really well until he fell into the dabbing crowd again and started using. And this time he called me in the middle of the night and said, my room is bugged. My phone is bugged. This is actually an FBI base. The mob is after me. And everybody knows everything about it, and you're in on it. And had a complete psychotic break from using all these dabs again. So lost, had to withdraw him again, mental hospital again. This time they had to put him on some antipsychotics to tamp down that delusion. He was just really sure the mob was after him. And he recovered again. And he stopped using. He was fine. He had a second chance. And then we went to the third university, which was Colorado Technical University. Got a new puppy, had a new job, had a new condo, was doing great. Met up with an old bad news girlfriend who was using dabs every day. Started using again. And long story short, he stopped using his nicotine, marijuana, and sadly went off his antipsychotics, and we did not know it. And the delusion came back. And 3 days before he died, he came over to our house for dinner, which he often did. And he said, "Hey, Mom, I just want you to know you were right." And I said, "About what?" I didn't know what we were talking about. He said, "About the marijuana. You told me years ago that it would hurt my brain, and it has ruined my mind and my life. And I'm sorry, and I love you." And 3 days later, he was dead. So that's what we're working to do here at Johnny's Ambassadors, is just to share his warning with others that, marijuana is not harmless. It isn't the marijuana that was used in Woodstock in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's a very different drug, and it's making our children psychotic and causes mental illness, causes depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, causes anxiety. There's a false narrative out there in the marijuana industry that, it will help with your anxiety, it will help with your depression. And it's actually completely the opposite, especially for young people. So that's where we really are focusing our work on young people, teens. Johnny started when he was 14. He died when he was 19. It's rampant in college. We have another son, our surviving son, James. And we were just up there for Parents' Weekend and, walked into one house and there's a bong just casually sitting there not in his house, in someone else's house. He tries as much as possible to tell people, hey, lay off the weed and you'll feel better. But we're really working to explain to them about their brains developing and that it's not this healing plant that everybody makes it out to be.
Yes, totally. And, I want to highlight some of the things that were shocking to me that, I didn't really even understand. I don't live in Colorado, right? I live in Indiana. And so marijuana is not legal here, but the idea of the medical marijuana card, right? And just to really get an understanding of this, what does this look like? So when people say, hey, we want to legalize marijuana, this is not typically the thing that they're thinking about. You go to a concert, there's a dispensary truck on one end, and on the other end of that truck is a pot doctor, right? So who's giving you, for a couple $100, who's giving you your medical marijuana card so that you can then go and get marijuana from the pot shop right next to it. And these pot doctors, they do not have to sign their name. They do not have to, there's no accountability with that, right? So it does not matter how many, and from the statistics that you gave, it's almost like this 80-20 principle. It's that 20% of doctors are writing 80% of these prescriptions or the majority of these prescriptions, and they're doing it for a profit. And so at the expense of young people who are just turning 18, and guys, think about where you were at 18 and the kind of decisions that you were making, right? And at the age of 18, being enabled to go and to buy marijuana, right? And it's not even just that, right? Like within the established, this is what blew my mind in reading your book, within the established legal places where you can go buy marijuana, there are some limitations, right? Like, hey, you can only buy this much. But there is nothing preventing you from then going to another pod shop, and there's tons of them, by the way, all over the place, and getting another one, right? Like getting more marijuana, right? There's no limit into what you can buy. And then even with some medical marijuana shops, like that strictly sell medical marijuana, you can get it at a discounted rate. And so like the pressure or the temptation for somebody who's trying to cope with anxiety, who's trying to cope with like the normal stresses of being a teen or a young adult, like going through college, going through high school, going through puberty even, right? And turning to this, it's not even that it's an option, it's that it's in their face, right? And that was one of the things that really stood out to me from your account. And why it's important for us to understand when we say, hey, we're going to legalize this stuff. Actually, what does that mean, right?
Yeah, and it's just become like normalized, and they make it sound like, oh, it's so good for you. This is going to help you, because they need to addict all of the teens younger, because those are their customer base. They sell over 70% of their product to 4% of their customers. I mean, they need the hardcore. They don't care really about the granny who's 65, who has arthritis, who eats her gummy every day, right? This is not who they're trying to get. They need the young ones. Addiction is an adolescent onset disease. You don't suddenly decide when you're 52 like me, oh, gee, I think I'll go smoke a bong, right? I mean, this is all stuff that happens when you're young. So it's just like the pill mills, where they would just write prescriptions for teens for nothing, any kind of malady you can make up. And then the process we call looping, going from dispensary to dispensary to dispensary, where it's not tracked in real time. You can't buy more than 40 grams. That is so much. You can't even use it. It's supposed to be for personal use, of course, but there's no way you could use all that. It's for selling. And we've changed that in Colorado. I fought hard with a coalition to pass Colorado Bill 1317 to regulate marijuana concentrates. So we have made it, starting January 1, much harder for 18 to 20-year-olds to get a hold of marijuana. We're very proud of that. We put some guardrails in place. They have to now have 2 doctors who independently certify that the teen has a debilitating and chronic condition, right? We don't want to take it away from those who legitimately need it, like seizures and I know a young man with severe autism who could actually function in a classroom because of a low-level THC CBD dose that he takes. That's fine. What we're talking about here are kids that are making up. I mean, Johnny had no physical problems. He went in and got his med card. We don't know who the doctor is. We can't find out. They are protected by the state. It's a criminal activity, and they're not most of the doctors. I want to make sure everybody understands that. There's just a few, and everyone knows who they are. And I have a doctor friend who lives in Colorado Springs, Dr. Ken Finn, who went in to try to get his medical marijuana card. He got it in like 10 seconds. It's like, what's the problem? Okay, yeah, boom. It's a joke. The whole thing is a joke. So when they say, medical, we have a few hundred children in Colorado under the age of 18, literally a few hundred, who use it for medical reasons. Their parents have chosen to use it to help them with something medical. We have 4,000 children ages 18 and above who suddenly developed a chronic condition at age 17, 364 days, right? And went and get their med card. It's a joke. It's a joke that you can walk in and buy this. And because their parents are even made to believe by the industry that it's safe. They don't share the research about the psychosis, about the amotivational syndrome, about the IQ drop, about suicide increasing 7-fold, right? About delusional thinking increasing fivefold. They don't share all of that science. They just say the things that they want to hear to sell. So it is an addiction for profit industry.
Laura, let's actually dive into this research, because that's one of the things that sets this book apart from, it's not just a parent's story of tragedy of losing a child. This is like informational. It is helpful. I learned a lot, and I'm in this industry, and I'm talking with people all the time who are in this industry, and I learned a ton. And I love also how it's done in simple language. So let's break this down, okay? So let's talk about the research. How does marijuana affect teens? And specifically, how does marijuana affect your mental health?
Sure. Well, just to reassure you, I did not know any of this either. Johnny died nearly 2 years ago, and I feel like I have a clinical now in this. And I am not a clinician. We have a scientific advisory board with Johnny's ambassadors who are medical doctors, who are experts in cannabis, who inform our work. So I just want everyone to know it is evidence based. It's research. It's not just, me spouting off platitudes. But I knew in the book that I needed to weave the story of Johnny in with the research. I didn't want to tell the story and then give the research. I wanted people to understand every time something happened to Johnny, why that was, right? And tie in the research. When a child is born, they have in their brain just billions of neurons. And in the book, I talk about it like, if you think of it like a jungle, right? The brain's first job is to cut paths through the jungle and connect the neurons and make synapses so that the brain can communicate. Then as the child grows, the next part is called pruning, and they cut off parts of the jungle where those paths are not taken. So if you play basketball, but you don't play the piano, the path to play the piano might be pruned away. And this is good. You want pruning to occur. It's kind of the use it or lose it type of thing. It helps the brain be more efficient. And then the pathways called myelination that are used a lot are then reinforced in the brain, right? They're myelinated, they're insulated. It's almost like putting a sheath of insulation over a wire so that they are fast, and it helps the transmission. So Johnny, for example, was very good in math. I mean, he could do math in his head so blazing fast, it would stun you. And so this process is going on until, for girls, the age of 25, and boys, they're now saying up to age 28. Some experts are even saying 30, that the brain is developing. So inside the brain, this is where it gets a little complex. There are a series of receptors. And they, if you think of the receptor like a lock, there are neurotransmitters that are like keys, right, that unlock the receptor. So in our natural bodies, we have a chemical called anandamide, and it is known as the runner's high, for example. It makes you feel good. It's Sanskrit for pure bliss. It's the happy neurotransmitter. Well, in the THC in the cannabis plant, tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient of cannabis, that molecule, THC, and anandamide both fit that same lock. It tricks the body into thinking it's the natural thing. Thus, our system was named the endocannabinoid system. The timing was just really bad. And some people go, oh, look at that. Our bodies are made to fit the THC molecule in. So THC molecule and our natural molecule, anandamide, are so similar that THC can come in, circumvent the system, and get into the lock and unlock it. The problem is it's so strong, it's unregulated by the body. It shoots off abnormally high levels, of dopamine. It binds to that receptor, which are called CB1, cannabinoid 1 receptors in the brain, and it prevents our natural chemicals from being able to get in, and it stays there. So the THC stays in the body for a very long time. Anandamide disperses very quickly, naturally. So as the teen uses, it needs more and more and more of this THC just to feel normal, because it no longer is making the natural feel-good chemical called anandamide. So when THC is introduced into that brain that is supposed to be forming, pruning, myelinating, that whole process is completely disrupted. So there is brain damage, literally, structural damage, growth is arrested, and the locations where those CB1 receptors are no longer function the way they are supposed to. So, for example, the amygdala. The amygdala is a region of the brain that regulates emotion. And so normally, if you see a bear, right, your endocannabinoid system would alert you to have adrenaline, to feel fear, right? Well, when THC gets into that, it sets it off at extreme levels, and you get what? Panic, anxiety, paranoia, right? This is where a lot of the paranoid thinking people are watching me who are using marijuana come from. So it affects the brain in extreme ways. We know with MRIs that the prefrontal cortex, for example, has CB1 receptors, that in the brain between the ages of 14 and 19, when they took their MRI scans, depending upon how many times they had used marijuana over their lifetime, that prefrontal cortex got thinner and thinner and thinner, structurally different. So versus a parent, an adult who has already formed all of their brain, that youth brain is still growing, and it's plastic, and it can be permanently altered by that THC. And so if you continue to use and, for example, have this paranoid kind of psychotic episode, then you know that your brain is very influenced by THC, and you should never use it again. We have many people who reach out to Johnny's Ambassadors whose son or daughter, usually boys, have had a psychotic episode. They go to the emergency room. They're in full-blown psychosis. They get them out, get the THC out. They stabilize. Most of them can be just fine if they never use again. The problem is, like Johnny, they sometimes use again. And those repeated psychosis, going into psychosis, out of psychosis, eventually that can convert into more of a schizoaffective disorder, a schizophrenia type diagnosis. So that is how mental illness is actually caused by THC in the brain. And it's not that it's never going to hurt an adult. We just don't focus on adults in our work. There's no situation where marijuana is harmless for anybody, but it's much, much worse in adolescents whose brains are forming. So that's really the message that we are trying to get across when I go to schools and talk to teens. Scare tactics don't work. Don't use it because I said so don't work. Your brain is, your brain on eggs, the egg commercial where this is your brain on drugs. That stuff doesn't work. When you talk to young people and treat them with respect and with intelligence and actually explain the neuroscience and show them the photos of the MRIs and explain what they're doing to their minds when the THC enters, that's like, they are so shocked, right? And this is your only brain you have. This is it, and we teach them that you need to treat your brain like your BFF, right? That is the only one you're going to have. And here's what happens when you use. They can recover, but half of the time they don't, Clint. It becomes, and there's so many negative outcomes we could go over, but
Yeah. So, one of the things you're reminding me of is I talked with Dr. Jess Shakin, who wrote the book Born to Be Wild, and he talks about teen risk behavior, right? And he talks about, the documentary Scared Straight. And when we think about trying to scare or to pressure or to use facts to be able to dissuade people from doing things, it doesn't work very well, right? So one of the things that he talks about is pairing facts with emotion and with empathy. And here's what I mean. So, it's playing out what would actually happen should these things occur and asking the teen or the young adult to play it out, right? Not saying like this is going to happen to you and then this is going to happen to you. It's like saying, hey, so apparently these high THC forms of marijuana, they can interrupt your ability to produce this feel good normal chemical that keeps you like happy and balanced. So what do you think's going to happen to you if you no longer have that chemical? Right? And having them play through this in their mind, and then what happens, and then what happens, and then what happens. And so that they're empathetically able to see where they're going on this pathway compared to, hey, like let me tell you from step 1 to step 5. And it's the parent's job to do this, right? Like it's the parent's job to have not just one, but multiple conversations, a continuing conversation about this, because it's in order for us to be able to like make an impact, it does have to be formed through empathy, and that does have to have a relationship. And I think one of the things that you bring up that was really interesting was the idea of addiction and the idea about how marijuana has changed, right? So can you tell us a little bit more about how has marijuana and how it's changed over the years impacted the way that addiction is seen through teens and young adults?
sure. Well, I mean, when a lot of people like me who are old, I'm 52, when we think about marijuana, we're thinking about the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even into early 2000. Marijuana wasn't as addictive as it is now because it wasn't as potent, right? It's called the dose dependency or potency response. It's like, you know the difference when you look at analogies of alcohol, right? 3-2 beer versus Everclear, right? A cup of tea versus a quadruple shot Starbucks macchiato, right? I mean, you kind of already understand differences in potency. And so the plants back in my age when, and I used marijuana a couple times in high school. I didn't like it. But it was a plant, right? And we would roll it up and smoke a joint. And back then, you kind of feel happy and laugh. And, it was 2% tetrahydrocannabinol, the THC, or if you had the really good stuff, it was like 5%. Like that was as potent as you could get back then. So then the botanists got involved when medical marijuana came around in Colorado. That was 2000. And they said, hey, let's breed these female non-pollinated plants to produce more THC. So the botanists figured out how they could drop off the CBD levels. They're almost non-existent in the plant now, in the natural plant, and shoot up the level of THC. In fact, in Colorado, you can't find low potency flower. 18%, 28%. One botanist bragged that he has a 40% THC plant, which they said it was going to be impossible for a plant to be able to hold that much chemical, but he says he's done it. So the first thing to understand is that even the flower is considered a narcotic. Anything over 10% is a hard drug, is a high potency product. In fact, they're illegal in the Netherlands, for example, anything over 10%. But they took it a step further. They said, oh, you know what? This is cool. Let's take the plant and let's run a solvent through it, like butane or propane or ethanol. and it breaks off the trichomes on the plant, which are those little shiny things where all the THC is held at the top of the bud. And that breaks off with the solvent into a tray, and you throw the plant away. So this is what I try to get people to understand, is that today's products don't have any plant matter. They have just extracted the chemical. So in alcohol, you have to create the alcohol. In marijuana, you take out the THC that exists in the plant. Well, then it's with the solvent, so you have to distill it and extract it and filter it. They can't get all the solvent out of it. If you look at the ingredients on the back of a bag of shatter, for example, it will say butane right there in the ingredients, which means you're putting the poison also in your brain, the solvent itself. And they distill them. So when you think of vodka being distilled, for example, right, triple distilled, you take a concentrate, so maybe it's 80% THC, and now you can distill it, make it more pure, 90%, upwards of 100%. There is one company that's saying they now have 100% pure THC vape oil, which is THC, not nicotine. And they tend to name these concentrates by how they look. Batter looks like cake batter. Crumble looks like a cookie. Shatter looks like it will break. Wax looks like ear wax, right? And there's live rosin and bubble hash, and there are so many products, but they are very, very potent because they don't have plant matter. They are chemicals. So instead of the 2%, that we used to smoke when we were a kid, the minimum concentrate is 60%, the average is 80%, and in the vapes that they're vaping, right? So if you have an 80% vape and you buy a cart, right, that's a gram. Now you have 800 milligrams of THC, and let's say there's supposed to be 200 servings in a cart, right? And every time you inhale, there's 4 milligrams of THC. An entire joint, right? An entire joint can be can be 25 milligrams versus 800 milligrams in this little cartridge of THC. And the teens are not vaping it like this. They're right, big, heavy, long inhale. And when I wake up, before I go to class, after class, walking to the next class, right? Before lunch, after, they are high all day long, and they can go through a cart in a day. We're talking 800 milligrams of THC. So it is a totally different drug, Clint. It's like apples and oranges. If you think about the cocoa plant, and then you make cocaine, but then you make crack, right? It's kind of like that. And they actually do have a crack form of marijuana. It's called THCA, crystalline, and it's 99.99% pure THC, and it's a rock. It looks like crack, and it's used in the same type of device that one would use smokable cocaine. And that's why they call them dabs, because you just need a little dab of this like wax, and you use a heating element, a device, typically a propane torch, right? You heat that up really high to it's almost red hot, called the nail, or if you have a vaporizer device, there's an element in there, and you just touch it to it, and it makes that dab sizzle, and you're inhaling the vapors. So dabbing is inhaling the vapors of a concentrated marijuana product. We are very excited that on Friday, there will be a big feature in People magazine featuring Johnny's story, photos of marijuana products, trying to educate parents that this is not your granddaddy's weed, right? This is not your weed. It's a totally different thing. So invite people to go and check that out as well.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we link to that in the show notes. And you kind of lead us to this initiative that you've set up, and it's hashtag Stop Dabbing. And you kind of alluded to the fact that anytime technology changes, right? People's bodies, people's chemical makeup, our organic structure doesn't always have a chance to catch up, right? We've seen this with social media. We've seen this with all types of technology in which our bodies are still trying to adapt for the ways that we have innovated on an exponential scale, right? And we're seeing that it's no different with marijuana and with THC. And that's why you've kind of initiated this hashtag stop dabbing. So I want you to just tell us a little bit more. Where can people go to learn more about you, Johnny's Ambassadors, the work that you do, be a part of it, that kind of thing?
Well, we're interacting a lot with teens on Insta, of course. So Instagram.com/Johnny's Ambassadors. We just use hashtag stop dabbing on everything. We have a Facebook group our parents are very active in. If you look up Johnny's Ambassadors, you'll find us on Facebook. Our website, we have free, everything is free on our site. Videos, toolkits, graphics, educational webinars. And that's johnnysambassadors.org. And there's an education menu there where, I mean, we literally have 75 hours of interviews with expert doctors and drug experts, psychiatrists, all on cannabis issues for teens, especially. So invite them to connect with us. We are very active. That's why we call them Johnny's Ambassadors, because these are people who go out. We have Train the Trainer. We have programs that they can give in their communities, libraries, schools, whoever they can get to listen to them. We train them and supply them with these materials and load them up with a lot of research and social media. So there's a lot of social media sharing going on. We're just on a big quest to educate parents and teens about the dangers of this very high THC product, particularly in adolescent brain development and the mental illness it can cause. And sadly, in my son's case, suicide, a 7-fold increase in suicide. So we really need to make sure that we don't lose generations of young people. It took tobacco, 60 years before they admitted that it was addictive and that we had some controls in place. And now you see a lot less smoking. But I think it's going to take just about as much time. I hope not. But with the legalization looming nationwide, we have a big, big problem on our hands. If the voices giving the warnings are not louder than the voices encouraging all of our teens to use, it's no big deal, it's safe, it's harmless, it's nature, God made it, we're going to lose many, many teens. And we just want them to stop dabbing, not use any. And it's like, if you have to use, wait until you're 28, until your brain is done forming. Every brain will be harmed, but you just don't know what it's going to be. You don't know what's going to happen to you. You don't know if your IQ is going to go down, if your grades are going to fall, if you're going to be depressed, if it's going to make you psychotic, if it's going to make you feel suicidal. Everybody has different reactions, but it does cause brain damage for young children who use. So I hope people join us. Hope other teens share our funny graphics. Johnny is a cartoon on Instagram. And so we have him saying a lot of funny things, and teens are putting us on their stories to try to encourage other teens not to use marijuana.
Yeah, I love that you are a voice of truth in a time in which it's, probably unpopular to take this kind of position, but it's too important, right? So Laura,
I get lots of nice notes.
Yeah, Laura, I like to ask people who come on the show, who do you think would be another person whose position would be interesting to hear on this show about teen or young adult mental health and substance use?
Well, I would say my colleague who led our coalition 1317 and rallied hundreds of parents. After I shared my story, then people got more brave and started sharing their stories. So Don Reinfeld was the one who led our uprising to get 1317 passed. here in Colorado, and it is not a partisan thing, even though this effort was led by the Democrats. You might be surprised to know that. Addiction touches every family. Doesn't matter your religion, your economic background, your political persuasion. We are all concerned about our youth. And Dawn is an activist, and we're trying to use Colorado as an example of how other states now can push back against the marijuana industry and hopefully put some guardrails in place legislatively to try to protect our youth and get them to stop dabbing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us on the podcast. Listeners, you can see all the stuff that Laura was talking about, to her book, to the website, to the information and education in the show notes below. We're even going to try and get that. You said it was People Magazine. Was that it?
Comes out on Friday, yeah.
Yeah, the People Magazine article, we'll make sure that we link to that too. Laura, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Clint. Thanks, everyone.
Listeners, remember, change is possible. You can do this, and we're here for you. We'll see you on the next episode. If you want to learn more about treatment options for you, your teen, or young adult, then tell us about your situation on a confidential call using the number in the show notes, or live chat with us at sandstonecare.com. We'll connect you with the treatment that you need, and if we're not the right fit, we'll get you where you need to go. Be well, and remember that change is possible.